The small, mud-soaked puppy sprinted through the dark alley, tiny paws slipping on wet pavement as he chased after the police officer with a desperation that didn't make sense. His trembling body, his frantic whines, and the way he refused to give up made the officer stop cold. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The puppy wasn't looking for food, shelter, or affection. He was trying to lead him somewhere, and in that split second, as the puppy stared up with pleading eyes, the officer felt a chill. What could a creature this small be trying so desperately to show him? Officer Daniel Ruiz had been on the force for nearly 12 years, known among his team for his steady calm, sharp instincts, and the quiet gentleness that made him the one neighbors trusted during crises. But his days were usually predictable. Routine patrols, community checks, guiding lost kids home, helping elderly residents cross busy streets. Nothing in his structured, orderly life ever prepared him for the chaotic energy of the tiny stray puppy who would one day shatter his composure. The puppy had appeared around the precinct a few times in the weeks prior, a trembling little thing with soft golden fur matted from rain and dirt, always watching from a distance but never approaching. Daniel had taken notice, even tossing scraps of leftover sandwich near the alley for the puppy to find, but the dog always kept its distance, skittish and silent. Something about the way the puppy observed him, head tilted, eyes wide with an odd mixture of fear and hope, lingered in his mind long after his shift ended. Daniel lived alone in a modest apartment, the kind where the lights hummed and the carpet never quite softened no matter how much you walked on it. He'd always wanted a dog but told himself he was too busy for one, too afraid of forming an attachment he couldn't fully nurture. His job demanded focus, and heartbreak wasn't something he allowed himself room for. But that stray pup with the golden coat had slowly carved a place in the back of his thoughts, appearing in his mind during quiet nights and early morning patrols. The city streets carried an unsettling tension lately. Reports of break-ins near abandoned buildings, strange noises echoing through alleys after midnight, shadows moving behind run-down warehouses. Daniel had been assigned to investigate the area during evening shifts, and the unease gnawed at him, though he kept it contained behind a professional mask. On one particularly heavy evening, clouds draped the sky like a warning. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else, something metallic. Daniel's patrol led him through a narrow street lined with collapsed fences, rusted dumpsters, and broken-out windows that whispered stories no one wanted to hear. He paused when he spotted a familiar shape near the dumpster. The little golden puppy, hunched, shivering, staring straight at him as if waiting. The sight pierced him unexpectedly. The puppy looked thinner than before, its ribs faintly visible beneath the dirty fur, its eyes glistening with exhaustion. But there was something else in its stance. Urgency, as if it had been searching for him. The dog didn't run away this time. Instead, as Daniel stepped closer, it crawled forward hesitantly, paw by paw, tail tucked tightly as if bracing for a blow that never came. Daniel crouched, keeping his movements slow, and noticed the pup's breathing, quick, shallow, panicked. It wasn't acting like a typical stray scavenging for food. It was acting like a creature burdened with fear. When the first rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, the puppy jolted and glanced behind itself toward the alley it had come from. That was the moment Daniel noticed a faint streak of mud smeared along its side, as if it had squeezed through something tight or escaped from somewhere it wasn't meant to be. He extended a hand, but before it could get close, the puppy abruptly spun around and bolted a few steps, then stopped, looked back at him, and barked a single sharp bark, weak but insistent. It wasn't running away from him. It wanted him to follow. Daniel felt a strange weight settle in his chest, a prickling sense that something was watching them from the darkened corners beyond the alley. A discarded bottle clattered somewhere unseen, making the puppy flinch. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint sound, a sound that Daniel couldn't place, thin and distant, something like a soft cry carried from deeper within the maze of abandoned buildings. The puppy's ears shot forward. Its gaze locked onto his. Its tail trembled. And then, without warning, it sprinted toward the sound, stopping every few feet to ensure he was behind. Daniel hesitated. His training told him to call for backup. His instincts told him he didn't have time. The puppy seemed fragile, desperate, terrified, but determined. Determination in an animal that small meant something was terribly wrong. He took one step forward. The puppy's entire posture changed. Relief, urgency, almost gratitude flickering in its expression. Something in Daniel softened. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. and with the storm clouds thickening overhead and the uneasy silence swelling around them, he began to follow the trembling golden puppy into the narrowing, shadow-drenched alley where danger, unseen but near, waited quietly in the dark. Daniel followed the tiny golden puppy deeper into the maze of abandoned buildings, his footsteps echoing through the narrow passageways as the storm gathered strength overhead, the sky flickering with distant lightning that momentarily illuminated the maze of rusted fire escapes and broken windows. The puppy ran ahead in frantic bursts, then paused to look back at him with wide, pleading eyes, its entire body vibrating with urgency as if every second mattered. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, filled with the damp smell of mold and the metallic bite of old machinery left to decay. Every instinct in Daniel's body screamed that something was wrong here, seriously wrong. Yet the small, trembling creature leading him forward seemed to sense far more than he could, reacting to sounds he couldn't hear, shadows he couldn't see, and dangers he couldn't yet understand. A sudden crash somewhere behind them made the puppy whirl around in panic, planting itself between Daniel and the darkness, as if ready to defend him despite its tiny, fragile frame. The unlikely protectiveness hit him like a shock, stirring a mixture of fear and admiration that tightened his throat. The puppy wasn't running away from danger. It was guiding him straight toward the heart of it. A gust of wind funneled through the alley, carrying a faint sound that made the hair on Daniel's arms stand up, a thin, wavering cry so soft it might have been swallowed by the storm, if not for the puppy's immediate reaction. The little dog froze, ears pricked, eyes widening in recognition, then darted forward again with renewed urgency, weaving between collapsed crates, jagged metal sheets, and puddles shimmering with reflections of lightning. Daniel quickened his pace, adrenaline starting to take hold as he realized this wasn't just a case of a stray looking for help. The puppy was leading him closer to something, or someone, who was trapped, hurt, or worse. The deeper he followed, the more signs of struggle he saw: disturbed patches of dirt, scattered trash, claw marks on a half-rotted wooden board, and dark stains he didn't want to identify glistening along the ground. The puppy huddled low each time they passed a shadowed doorway, growling a tiny, trembling growl that shouldn't have sounded threatening, but carried a fierce sense of warning, as if it could feel the presence of something lurking just beyond the edge of human perception. As they turned a sharp corner, the alley opened into a wider clearing behind a crumbling warehouse, and the atmosphere shifted with a sudden, chilling stillness. The puppy stopped dead in its tracks, tail tucked, head low, scanning the space as if it expected danger to strike at any moment. Daniel noticed deep footprints in the mud, too large to belong to the puppy, too fresh to be old, leading toward a partially collapsed doorway at the base of the warehouse. The puppy approached the footprints cautiously, sniffing, trembling, but pushing on because something inside was pulling it forward. Daniel felt the same pull now. A gut-deep dread mingled with a grim determination that made his pulse hammer. Lightning cracked across the sky, briefly illuminating the warehouse interior through broken slats, revealing the skeletal remains of machinery, dangling wires, and gaping holes in the floor that looked like open mouths waiting to swallow anyone who stepped wrong. The puppy let out a soft whine as it stood at the entrance, torn between fear and desperation, and when Daniel stepped inside behind it, the darkness seemed to close around them like a living thing. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, carrying the faint smell of rot and something that reminded Daniel of old, dried blood. The puppy moved cautiously now, its tiny paws making soft taps against the concrete, its body pressed low as its ears twitched toward sounds only it could detect. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the dark in thin slices, illuminating scattered debris and rusted tools. But the shadows seemed to move in ways that set every nerve in his body on high alert. A metallic clang echoed from somewhere in the structure, sending the puppy spinning around and pressing itself against Daniel's boot as if begging him to stay alert. The warehouse groaned under the pressure of the storm outside, and every shift of the wind made loose panels rattle like chains being dragged across the floor. The tension grew tighter with each step, wrapping around them like a coil ready to snap. Then the puppy suddenly darted toward a narrow corridor to the left, letting out a sharp, urgent bark before disappearing into the pitch black passage. Daniel followed quickly, his flashlight revealing a cramped service hallway lined with peeling paint and pipes dripping cold water. The puppy stopped halfway down, staring toward the very back of the corridor, where the darkness seemed thicker, heavier, wrong. A faint sound rose from that direction again. The soft, choked cry he had heard earlier, clearer now, filled with pain and fear. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't the wind. It was a human cry. Daniel's pulse surged. The puppy whimpered, then pushed onward, squeezing through a gap where part of the wall had collapsed. Daniel crouched and shined his light through the opening, his breath catching when he saw the small cavity behind it, a forgotten maintenance room buried in shadow. The flashlight beam shook in his hand as he scanned the room, revealing broken crates, water, damaged insulation, and debris that had fallen from the ceiling. But the moment the beam hit the far corner, everything inside Daniel tightened. There was movement, faint, weak, trembling. The cry came again, softer now, like someone trying to hold on but slipping. The puppy scrambled forward, paws skidding on loose debris, and Daniel squeezed through the narrow gap to follow, aware that he was entering a confined space with no immediate exit. The air felt suffocating. The darkness felt alive. And the closer he got, the clearer the truth became. The puppy had not been trying to save itself. It had been trying to bring him here, to whatever lay struggling in the shadows. But just as Daniel took another step, something shifted above him. A soft creak, a whisper of dust falling, a warning too late. The ceiling groaned as though something heavy had been disturbed, and the puppy snapped its head upward with a frantic bark, its body stiffening in panic. Daniel froze, looking up. Something massive hung precariously overhead, an old machinery mount shaking loose from rusted bolts, tilting inch by inch as the building shuddered from the storm's impact. The puppy bolted toward the corner where the faint movement continued, barking urgently as if commanding him to hurry before the collapsing structure crushed everything beneath. In that heartbeat of realization, Daniel felt the danger close around him like a vice. The trapped crying, the trembling puppy, the unstable building, the unseen threat lurking behind each shadow, all converged into a single terrifying truth. He wasn't just here to investigate. He was seconds away from a disaster that could bury them all, and whatever the puppy had brought him to find was lying just beyond the reach of his light, waiting for him to uncover a truth that would break him. The moment the ceiling groaned again, the entire warehouse seemed to inhale, as if the structure itself knew it was about to collapse under the weight of years of rot and a violent storm pounding from above. And Daniel felt a jolt of panic surge through him as the trembling golden puppy raced ahead into the shadows with a courage far too big for its fragile body, its sharp barks slicing through the suffocating darkness like warnings he could no longer ignore. The crying from the far corner grew weaker, more ragged, and as Daniel forced himself forward over cracked cement and debris, his flashlight beam trembled across the hidden space until it landed on the shape that froze every bone in his body. A small, terrified child wedged beneath a tangle of fallen pipes and crumbling plaster, barely conscious, bruised, and pinned so tightly she could hardly draw breath. The truth hit him like a blow. The puppy hadn't been seeking help for itself, but had been desperately trying to save the child trapped here, alone, in the dark, in a place no one else would have found. The little dog pressed itself against the girl's side, whining, pawing gently at her arm in a heartbreaking attempt to comfort her, its tiny frame shaking as dust drifted down from the unstable ceiling above them. Daniel dropped to his knees, adrenaline flooding him as he assessed the collapsing structure. The entire support beam overhead was splintering, sagging, ready to crash down with deadly force at any second. The storm outside intensified, each thunderclap rattling the metal skeleton of the warehouse and sending vibrations through the floor that made the debris around them shift ominously. The puppy darted back and forth between Daniel and the girl, urging him with frantic eyes, as if begging him to move before the final collapse sealed their fate. The beam gave another loud crack, tilting further, dust bursting into the air like smoke, and Daniel knew he had seconds, maybe less, to act. He grabbed the edge of the tangled pipes restraining the girl and heaved with all his strength, muscles burning as rusted metal screeched against concrete, but the debris resisted, jammed tight by the unstable ceiling above. The puppy planted its paws against one of the lower pipes and pushed with its whole tiny body, a useless gesture in terms of strength but a powerful surge of determination that reignited Daniel's resolve. He repositioned, bracing his shoulder under the largest pipe, despite the biting pain that shot through him, and forced upward with a desperate, primal power fueled by the knowledge that a child's life, and the brave puppy's loyalty, depended on him. The pipe shifted, inch by inch, enough for the girl to gasp a thin breath. But the movement triggered the ceiling again. A massive chunk of rotted wood broke free, crashing to the floor close enough to send a shockwave of dust over them. The puppy leapt in front of the girl at the last second, shielding her with its small body, its instincts overriding its fear as it stood guard against falling debris far larger than itself. Daniel felt his heart twist at the sight, the raw purity of that sacrifice from a creature who owed the world nothing but still gave everything. With a final surge, he managed to lift the pipe high enough to free the child's legs, then dragged her out from the pocket of debris as another beam snapped above them, sending a sharp echo through the warehouse. But the moment he moved her into the open, the largest support column gave a deep, thunderous groan, the kind that signaled the final moment before collapse. The entire room trembled, fragments of the ceiling raining down in dangerous bursts, and Daniel scooped the girl into his arms, turning toward the only exit he knew they could reach in time, the narrow gap in the wall they had crawled through minutes earlier. The puppy ran ahead, barking urgently, alerting him to falling chunks of concrete and shifting metal, guiding his steps like a frantic guardian whose instincts knew exactly where the danger would strike next. The path behind them began splitting apart, the concrete cracking like ice under pressure, and Daniel sprinted as the building's internal frame gave way, groaning under the storm's assault. A massive crash exploded behind them, forcing him to duck as a cloud of dust and debris chased them like a wave. The girl's weight grew heavier in his arms as she drifted in and out of consciousness, her small hand gripping his shirt with fading strength, and the puppy paused just long enough to nudge her foot with its nose before bolting forward again to lead the way. They reached the narrow crawl space, but the moment Daniel shoved the girl through to the alley beyond, the ceiling above them split with a violent crack, the entire corner of the warehouse collapsing inward. The puppy turned back, locking eyes with Daniel for a split second, as if making a decision that went beyond instinct, beyond fear, beyond anything a creature so young should ever have to face. Then, in a burst of desperate courage, it flung itself at Daniel's leg, barking rapidly, refusing to leave him behind as debris rained down around them. He grabbed the tiny dog with his free hand and lunged through the gap just as the entire ceiling caved in behind them, a roar of destruction filling the night as the warehouse collapsed in a massive cloud of dust that swallowed everything where they had stood seconds earlier. Daniel hit the ground outside hard, shielding the girl and cradling the puppy against his chest, his heart pounding as the storm raged overhead and the ruined building groaned under its own death. And as the air settled, and the trembling puppy nuzzled the unconscious girl's face with soft whines of worry, Daniel realized with overwhelming clarity the full truth of what had happened, that this tiny stray, abandoned and overlooked by the world, had risked everything over and over to save a child no one knew was missing. The storm thundered above them as Daniel tightened his grip on the puppy, the weight of the moment crashing over him with a force more powerful than any falling beam. And the truth struck him so deeply it stole his breath. This little dog had just done what most grown men never could. The storm had begun to ease by the time backup arrived, but the chaos it left behind felt small compared to the devastation inside Daniel's chest as he knelt in the muddy alley cradling the unconscious little girl and keeping the trembling golden puppy pressed against him for warmth, the three of them forming a fragile island of survival amid shattered beams and swirling dust. Emergency lights painted the alley in harsh flashes of red and blue, sirens fading into the background hum as paramedics rushed in, lifting the child gently from Daniel's arms, assessing her injuries with swift precision, and securing her onto a stretcher. Daniel watched them work, his chest tight, his breath uneven, as the realization sank deeper with every passing second that this child, scared, hurt, nearly lost to the world, would have never been found if not for the tiny dog shivering in his arms. The puppy was exhausted, barely able to keep its head lifted, its body coated in dust and grime, tiny paws scraped raw from scrambling across broken concrete and metal. Yet it leaned into Daniel with a trust that was almost painful to witness. The paramedics checked the puppy too, surprised at how far such a fragile creature had pushed itself. But their gentle nods told Daniel the little dog would recover with rest, warmth, and care. As the child was carried into the ambulance and the rear doors closed with a soft thud, Daniel felt the weight of the night finally settle into the deepest part of him, the destruction behind them, the near-death escape, the storm, the fear, the desperate chase. It all blurred into a single earth-shaking truth that rose within him like a slow, unstoppable tide. The puppy had chosen him, not because he was a cop, not because he was strong, But because something in that tiny heart believed Daniel would understand the silent plea for help, would follow without hesitation, would be the one human who could carry the responsibility of saving a life too small and fragile to save itself. In the days that followed, the story spread through the department, through the neighborhood, through the city, turning into something larger than anyone expected. A missing child case, once thought to be a kidnapping with no leads, now had a survivor, a rescue, a hero. And that hero, as every newspaper and local broadcast quickly learned, was not a police officer but a stray puppy barely past weaning age. Officers who had seen it all found themselves stopping by the precinct break room just to look at the tiny dog curled up in a fleece blanket Daniel had bought from a nearby store after his shift. They spoke more softly around it, bringing small treats, scratching its ears gently, each of them silently reckoning with the magnitude of courage found in such a fragile creature. The department officially credited the rescue to Daniel, but he corrected every report, every interview, directing the spotlight where it belonged, and soon the headlines changed. The world wanted to meet the little dog who had refused to give up on the girl he loved and the officer he trusted. Yet despite all the attention, the puppy stayed glued to Daniel, following him with tiny steps, watching every move with eyes that carried an almost human depth of emotion. Daniel found himself unable to focus on anything else during quiet nights at home. He kept replaying the moment he first saw the puppy in the alley, the moment it turned back and barked at him, the moment its determination overpowered its fear. It had seen danger no one else had heard. It had acted on instincts no one else could feel, and it had done so while carrying its own loneliness, hunger, and pain. When the little girl finally woke in the hospital 2 days later, her first movements were weak. But her first instinct was to ask for the puppy, reaching out with trembling fingers as soon as she saw Daniel walk in carrying the tiny golden hero swaddled in a soft blanket. Her entire face changed. The tightness of fear replaced by a fragile glow of relief and love, and the puppy, just hearing the girl's soft breaths, came to life with excitement despite its lingering exhaustion, wiggling and nudging its head gently against her arm. The connection between them was undeniable. Something raw and pure, forged not in comfort but in shared survival. Daniel watched them, something blooming in his chest that he couldn't name, something that began as awe and softened into something far deeper. The girl's parents wept as they learned what the puppy had done, their gratitude overwhelming, their voices choked with the realization that their daughter would not be alive if not for this stray with desperate courage. They asked Daniel what would happen to the puppy now. And as he looked down at the little hero curled against the girl's side, he felt the answer settle inside him like a truth that had been waiting to surface for a very long time. When the doctors cleared the girl to go home days later, she clutched the puppy close, whispering silent thanks into its fur, and Daniel felt something inside him shift again. The final piece of a story he hadn't known he needed, but the aftermath was not just medical charts and media interviews. It was emotional healing woven quietly throughout the days that followed. Daniel visited the girl often, bringing small toys, comfort items, and most importantly, the puppy, who seemed to bring life back into the child's eyes faster than any treatment. Doctors noted the change, parents clung to it, and Daniel watched from a distance as the little dog curled protectively beside her during naps, padded close behind her as she walked down the hallway with trembling steps, and pressed its warm body to her when nightmares threatened to pull her back into darkness. Each visit carved Daniel deeper into both of their lives, not as an officer, not as a hero, but as someone who had found a part of himself he didn't realize had been missing, a protector, a giver, a quiet anchor in someone else's storm. When the girl was finally discharged, the puppy trotted beside her wheelchair with proud little steps, tail swishing gently, head high despite its lingering injuries. The first breath of fresh outdoor air made the girl close her eyes and hold the puppy tighter, and Daniel, standing beside them, felt a moment of profound gratitude that the world could still produce something this beautiful, this resilient, from a night so dark and terrifying. As her family prepared to take her home, the girl asked a question with her eyes, a question Daniel had already asked himself countless times. Could the puppy stay with her permanently? Could the hero dog belong to the child whose life he had saved? Daniel felt the answer like a gentle pull inside him. But the little dog looked up at him, tail wagging slowly, conflicted in its tiny body because in its short, difficult life, it had known love in only two forms: the girl it had saved and the man it had trusted to lead them both out of the darkness. The decision felt impossible until the girl's mother placed a hand over Daniel's, silently inviting him into something bigger than a rescue report or a fleeting heroic moment. The realization washed over him with overwhelming clarity. The puppy didn't have to choose. Healing could grow in more than one home. Love could stretch across more than one heart, and family, true family, didn't always look the way the world expected. In the weeks that followed, Daniel helped the family settle into routines, bringing supplies, checking on the girl's progress, visiting the puppy who greeted him each time with ecstatic joy, its golden tail thumping wildly, its eyes bright and trusting. On weekends, the girl and her parents visited Daniel's apartment, where the puppy ran between them all, unburdened at last by fear or hunger, its life transformed from an abandoned stray into a cherished guardian whose courage had rewritten the fate of an entire family. And Daniel's own heart. The bond between man, child, and dog deepened into something unspoken but unbreakable, an unshakable reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures ignite the largest transformations. Daniel found himself spending time not out of duty, but out of a growing sense of belonging, a newfound understanding that the loneliness he had carried for years had been broken open by the bravery of a puppy that refused to give up on hope. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon and cast warm gold across the girl's backyard, the puppy curled between them both, sighing in contentment. Daniel watched the girl laugh softly at the feel of the puppy's warm nose against her cheek, watched her parents smile with gratitude that reached deeper than words, and felt something inside him settle with a quiet, powerful peace. The storm was over. The fear had passed. The scars, both seen and unseen, were healing. And the little golden puppy who had once stood trembling in the rain was now the heart of an entire family, and the bridge between lives that might never have touched. As Daniel looked at the puppy nestled against the girl, its tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, he understood the full magnitude of the journey that had brought them here, the truth that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the world's greatest heroes arrive on the smallest paws, carrying love fierce enough to pull strangers out of darkness and stitch broken lives back together one heartbeat at a time.